Yes, this will explain it, I think, a little bit more. This will give you an idea also about the interlocking relationship, not only between corporations and politicians, but more importantly, the bureaucrats who set these rules for the Federal Elections Commission. I think I mentioned this before. The Supreme Court ruled that there was no way to outlaw private funds from political campaigns due to the First Amendment. That was their interpretation of the First Amendment, and the way the courts configured that's probably the way it's going to stay. In the 1980s and 90s, individuals were limited, I believe, to $5,000 apiece, and corporations to $100,000, although I think that went up to half $500,000 that they could give to a campaign, and that's it. And even political action committees, which this is what this is. The bigger issue is that many times these super PACs are the ones who are putting out these really horrific negative ads. They are spending not at the behest of the candidates, but many times, obviously not with the approval of the candidates, sometimes they are. Secondarily, many times a super PAC that's trying to support Mitt Romney will put out ads against Newt Gingrich and not even talk about Mitt Romney. So one of the things that this has occurred, it has lengthened the election season. Now we're into this constant campaigning. I mean, they started campaigning for the presidency. The Republican nominee started campaigning in the summer of 2011. And they are already, by the winter of 2010, people were starting to announce. I mean, the absurdity of that. And I almost think sometimes that politicians do that on purpose so they can turn off half the voters in the United States. I really do think that there are certain politicians, and you could bet this is probably Mitt Romney's attitude, especially since what he said about poor people, that Mitt Romney would prefer to have about 20% of the American public vote, if not just 5%. He'd just like all his rich friends and all their friends to go and vote for him, and he'd win the election. Fortunately for those people who don't support Mitt, that's not the case. However, saying that, your likelihood to vote goes up the wealthier you are. Your likelihood to get involved in a political campaign goes up the wealthier you are. The likelihood that you're going to contribute money or be a member of one of the two major parties goes up as your wealth goes up, as well as your age going up. And in general, and this didn't used to be the case in America, as your age goes up, what happens normally to your wealth? It goes up. So as you get older and your wealth goes up, you're more likely to vote for one of these major party candidates. And particularly if you look at recent statistics, although elderly people do vote for Democrats more often, they're much more likely to vote Republican, actually. Because Republicans, first of all, I find it funny that Republicans always talk about fiscal responsibility and then they go down to Florida and promise old people everything. We'll build you, we'll name a bridge after you, we'll give you this money, and it's like, what is going on around here? But it shouldn't surprise people the way politics is played that President Obama will go to a Jewish group and say one thing and then go to a Catholic group and say something different. Okay? And if you haven't noticed lately, he's gotten into a little bit of trouble with Catholics. Right? Does anybody remember what happened? Has anybody been following this story, especially since it's Malloy and Jesus is hanging up on the wall here on the cross? Does anybody know what happened? He was forcing, if you were a Catholic organization, in your healthcare plan, to pay for birth control and contraception, and not giving anybody a way out. And this is indicative in the minds of a lot of people said this is not a big deal. And actually, I saw a polling data yesterday in the New York Times that said a slight majority of people in the United States actually agree with them. Believe it or not. You know who supported the ban on supporting contraceptives more? Who would you guess? Catholics or Protestants? Huh? No, it was Protestants. Protestants were more against Obama's plan than Catholics. I don't know why. I would suggest what it speaks to is a divergence between what the Pope says and what American Catholics believe. And this is something that European Catholics have believed their entire existence, that American Catholics sort of give lip service to a lot of the things. Like, a lot of Americans love the Pope, but most Catholics, I would say at least 55% of Catholics, just think that some of the rules of the church are just crazy sounding. And I find it funny because Do you hear Baptist ministers preaching against birth control? Probably most of you don't go to a Baptist church. I grew up Free Will Baptist. I've been to Lutheran churches. They don't bother talking about this stuff. And Lutherans love talking against the Pope, because that was their main thing. Martin Luther, again, was almost killed several times and arrested for this. Yes?
I understand what you're saying, but it would be like, it's just weird. As much of a double standard as it is for Catholics to be endorsing and paying for child, like, all that stuff, it'd be a double standard for him to say, like, I'm for this, and, like, to be like, oh, you don't have to do this.
Well, what the problem becomes, and again, I'm not taking a position. I'm just trying to give you both views of this. What the problem becomes is the First Amendment, it guarantees the freedom of religion. If my religion says that abortion is wrong and birth control is wrong, and then the government crams crap down my face.
That's no separation.
It's way different than I'm telling you. Tell me your name again. I'm sorry.
I'm Tom.
If I'm telling Tom, you have to go. Your health plan has to include support for birth control. You can sue me in court, and you probably win. It's another thing when the federal, and that's an issue of in and of itself. But even that's more acceptable than this. The federal government standing up on high with the whip in its hand, saying to the Catholic Church and other, and it ain't just the Catholic Church that's against birth control, and especially abortion. Okay, there are Orthodox sects of Judaism as well as almost all Protestant sects are against abortion. With the whip going, I don't care whether or not you want to pay for this or whether you support this. This is the way it is, and you're going to do what we say. And that's something that I think most Americans, no matter what the issue is, that's not the attitude they want their government to take.
Remember the little charts you made with the Marx?
Right.
That whole thing with the economy in the middle makes so much sense. I feel like that's the way, like...
You mean the Marxist view?
I guess.
That the let me get a marker and draw this stuff up here again.
Economy and then everything else, right?
So you think that even when the economy's not, it's either directly or indirectly, because this is what Marx says. Marx says the economic institutions set the tone for every other institution. So for example, if we take the church, what Marx would say, first of all, he hated the church. He called it the opiate of the masses. He thought it prevented social revolution from happening because the church tells you to suffer in this life so you can be rewarded in the next. And the church was consistently anti-union for hundreds of years because they felt that that takes away from your dedication to the church. What they would say there is, Marx would say, you know what, churches are nothing but proxies for economic institutions. They teach things like capitalism. They deal in money. What is up with all these World Harvest Church and all these gigantic mega churches? And have you ever been to the Vatican? I mean, you ever seen pictures of the Vatican? Does it look like a poor shed in the woods, or does it look like a palace that Julius Caesar would be walking around in?
What does all the money pay for now?
Huh?
What is all the money that the donate pay for now?
So you can put gold trimming on the Sistine Chapel.
So I'm not saying there's no
it doesn't. Let me put it this way, and I will say this about all these religions. I know where the money doesn't go, and that's to poor people.
To where it belongs. Okay?
Does the Catholic Church give poor people grants or welfare or buy them food or anything like that? Does it help middle class? Yeah. If you're really poor, they run food banks and soup kitchens, which is really bad food, and it is disgusting to go down to these. Some of them are just not all of them. There's one over here, the Marie Brennan Inn or something that this school works with in conjunction with. Okay, but you know, in general, yeah, it goes to the Pope can drive around in his Pope mobile, and it goes. I'm not joking. He has a Pope mobile with a bubble in it, because somebody tried to shoot John Paul when he came to believe. Where else would they try to shoot the Pope? The United States. I mean, he's not going to Afghanistan. They'd probably shoot him there too. But
is that why they have that now?
Yeah, somebody took a shot. I don't remember where it was. I want to say it was on the East Coast somewhere. Someone tried to assassinate the Pope in the United States, and I'm telling you right now, I bet Italian Catholics did not appreciate the fact that their Pope went over, you know, or Poland, which he was Poland, went over to the United States, and somebody took a shot at him like he was some kind of international political figure, which he is, or like some kind of dangerous figure. But again, if you look at it, but I'll tell you right now, let me give you the church's position. They will tell you that, look, in order to get people to believe this stuff, we've got to give them something that's divine. That what the church represents is the beauty of heaven. And we're using these worldly possessions and the Michelangelo thing or whatever, all that other stuff to inspire people, like you would inspire somebody with an opera house, right? Like, isn't it impressive to go into an opera house and see all the chandeliers and stuff? And that, again, that was what, I don't want to get into some kind of 100 Years' War here, but that's what Martin Luther said. This is not Christianity, and I'm going to knock you idiots out of the way, and I'm going to let everybody in Germany know that all this is a money-making venture. Read what Martin Luther described about the way the church was in Rome in the 14th century, in the 15th century. They were selling forgiveness for sins. Martin said at one point that when he went to the Vatican to pray and take communion, and he was saying all the prayers and stuff, that some other priest was like, "Come on, just get this over with. Everybody knows this is just nonsense." You know, I mean, that level of cynicism was going on. Now, it doesn't prove the church is greedy or the Baptist church or the Protestant churches are much better, because Lutheran churches, some of them are very wealthy too. But I think what the point you're making here is, and I think it's a good point, is that here are the economic institutions, and they dictate to all other institutions that are sort of just there, the government, religion, family, that are sort of, you know, either it's a direct effect or, you know, it's an indirect effect, where the ideas of capitalism and its drive for profit and its material focus infect them like a disease, like cancer, infect, like schools. Schools, this is why I'm going to start my own school. Ohio State doesn't give a damn whether you learn one thing or not. I'm telling you right now. What do they care about? One thing and one thing only. Can you pay the tuition? And Ohio State's pretty cheap. Think about Harvard. They don't give a damn whether you learn how to do calculus or not. And one of the reasons why is if you got a Harvard degree, does it really matter what your grades are? I mean, seriously, George Bush got C's at Yale and became President of the United States. You know, it matters more that you have the degree, and I told you this before, it's written in all Ivy League schools write their degrees in Latin. And I'm telling you right now, do you think everybody who graduates from an Ivy League school knows how to read Latin? So people are paying $38,000 a year for tuition only. To get a degree that's essentially worthless, because most of them don't study, that they can't even read. And what does Harvard do? Ching. Harvard's endowment is $60 billion. And one of the reasons why is, who graduates from Harvard? Losers? Do they go on to be losers? Or do they go on to be Senator John Kerry? And President so-and-so? What does Harvard do with Zuckerberg? What do they do with him? Because they can't sit there and say he's a product of Harvard, because he's not, is he? Same with Gates. They both dropped out, I want to say, before the end of their second year. I want to say Gates dropped out after his first year. And I would say, Harvard, you've got a problem with your image if the most successful people you have at your school dropped out. Okay, because right now, the two most successful graduates of Harvard by sheer money are Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, who neither one of them, maybe they didn't want a degree written in Latin. You know? But again, or let's take the family. The family sort of becomes a transmission vehicle for capitalist value systems, right? The concept of the American dream, right? That you, in materialism, that keeping up with the Joneses is. It's like the social class thing, right? Looking at your neighbor's yard and wanting this stuff. And in the end, think about things like marriage and starting a family. Who benefits? Any kind of marriage catering company, the people who sell the dresses, the people who rent the hall. When you go get married, you're going to have to get a mortgage for a house or rent a place. You're going to have to buy furniture. You're going to have to buy home improvement stuff. You're going to have to buy clothes. Once you have a kid, now Toys R Us is involved and Walmart and all that. Do you see that? That's what Marx was singularly. I don't know if he's exactly right, but there is a lot of evidence that the economic system in the United States, especially over the past 30 years, has become so prominent that it's almost an unstoppable force. But I would say back up and say, you're telling me that this organization is subservient to this one? Because, or that capitalism rules? Because the other model is this one, that the government and the economic systems work together. Remember, the pluralist system was that like everybody's all equal and everybody holds hands. I mean, not really. But that, hey, religion's got equal power to the family, and the family's got equal power to the education, and it's just who can convince the public of their position.
Yeah, but that all comes down to who's willing to spend the most money.
That's true, and most families don't.
Well,
Let's take the family. Versus, you can take economic institutions, you can look at them as a whole. The problem is, in this country, there are 145 million households. And in order to say, well, that 145 million households have power, how do they have power? They don't see eye to eye on anything, right? Family is looked upon like a very loose conglomeration of institutional forms, right? The nuclear family has probably damaged the power of the family more than anything, meaning that if you have extended families in communities, the community is one big family and therefore can challenge the federal government or the state governments or religion or corporations. Like, for example, if you have a community, a tight-knit community where people are related or know each other as friends and see each other's family, they can keep Walmart out. There are communities that have kept Walmart out. There's I think it's Centerport. There is a little family farm there, and they've got a sign out there that says, keep 7-Eleven out of Centerport. Will they be able to do it? Probably not. And one of the reasons why is because the family has been stepped on by... look, let me put it this way. If your boss says to you, if you don't come in on Friday night and work overtime and miss your son's baseball game, you're going to be fired. What do the majority of people choose to do? Right. And that, I don't think there's any more of a statement that needs to be made. And the beautiful thing, and thanks for Tom to bring this up, in our time-bind book, that's exactly what we're going to be discussing. Who, in the battle between work and family, who's winning and why? And do some people find it more enjoyable to be at work than at home, and why? And what does home life become? And what is the government's role in making sure that corporations don't abuse that? So we'll get into all these issues later. But does anybody want to add to what, or support, or go against what Tom says, offer an alternative? How many people think this? Like, here's the Marxist, both these are conflict theory models. If you subtract out take the government out of that one, this is the Marx model. He was obsessed with class. C. Wright Mills, on the other hand, and many other people after him, talked about what we call the elite theory. Power elite is what he called it. And one of the things that he found out was that politicians were on corporate boards and stuff after they left office. And that military people would go into politics, and then politicians would go into business, and business people would be from the military. And he was like, wait a minute. And all these companies had relationships with each other, like Lockheed Martin. Or Boeing, if they don't get money from the government, they're out of business. Okay? And that's why Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he left office, described what he called as the military-industrial complex, MIC. And he said that this was a collection of, because Mills would put this in here too, that all three of these are in on this. And he said, you know what they do? These three organizations manipulate the government budget and manipulate public opinion and media opinion to make sure that they get, because if you get a government contract to sell airplanes to the jet fighters to the government, how's that different than you're just selling stuff to the public? What's guaranteed with the government contract that's not guaranteed if you're Walmart or McDonald's? What are businesses concerned about? One thing and one thing only. This is why they pollute the environment and don't give a damn. What is a business supposed to do? And this is why Tesla Motors is falling apart, because they're not being able to do this. They have to make money. What is guaranteed when you got a government contract? It says, I'll pay you this for this. Your profits every single quarter are guaranteed. Don't you think your stockholders like that? Don't you think executives like that? And on top of that, do you think that the government pays below market rate for stuff or above it? Yeah. It's actually in the law that they have to pay a fair market value. But, and also on top of that, do you think the government is concerned with efficiency as much as corporations are? So do things run over budget in the military? And they do this stuff on purpose so they can collect bonuses. Okay? And a lot of projects go over budget. Like for example, Texas Stadium in Arlington, the one where they just had their Super Bowl 2 years ago, that cost $1 billion. Almost half of that came from the taxpayers. You know, it was really strange. That Jet Stadium was going to be funded with taxpayer money. And this is what I love. Who's the ones that owns the jets?
It's the Johnsons.
They were going to get taxpayer money and still charge $10,000 for a personal seat license. They weren't. It wasn't like, hey, New York, give us the tax money and we'll discount the tickets. Or how about discounting the beer? I mean, God, $12 for a beer? You're just forcing people to sneak things in. It's like the movies. I'm paying $5 for a... You often hear, next time you go to the movies, especially on Friday night, listen for this. Because most people do it when it's loud. Listen for a or like that, because people will either open sodas or beer. Like crack them open and stuff like that. So anyway. But again, so, you know, what is going on here? And Dwight Eisenhower, he warned the country. He said, look, if you let these maniacs have control of your economy, they're going to run up. He didn't say it specifically, but he since said they're going to ruin the United States. And you can see what has happened. $15 trillion. We have spent as a national debt. First of all, we out of if you took the military spending of the entire world and it was one big pie. I'm trying to do this right. Let me just put the number up. That is the share that the United States spends. This is how much we spend every year on the military. This is the cost. We don't know the exact cost of the 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they still didn't have armor for the Humvees. We're fighting. This is how dumb your military is. We're fighting people who are in caves and hiding in little homes, who are using little explosives that they make out of their stuff out of their pocket. Why are we then building F-22 fighter jets that go into outer space? And again, I will repeat this, and I know it sounds a little absurd. People in the Pentagon need to quit watching Independence Day or Aliens or whatever the hell they're watching. Because there ain't nobody coming invading this country from the moon. And the Chinese aren't going to invade us. And I would say also to the U.S. military, what good is having 7,500 nuclear warheads if you're just going to fight a conventional war anyway? There's another thing. And you know how much money it costs to maintain 7,500 nuclear warheads? On top of that, are you 100% sure that these nuclear warheads are safe and secure? That some idiot hacker couldn't break into one of these things and launch one? Your government has left you vulnerable. On top of that, they have contaminated entire areas of the country with their nuclear waste too. And is there anything more absurd than building a weapon that you don't think you're ever going to use? I wouldn't carry a sword around unless I was going to use it. Police don't carry guns around just for looks. Well, yeah, look at it. It's made out of cardboard. I don't think so, right? And it's absurdity what goes on. On top of that, we spend more on our military than almost all the other nations on Earth combined, including China, including Russia, including countries that we consider to be enemies. And I would say to any country out there that if this money is spent even half as efficiently as I think it is, which is still not good, there's no way, there's not a nation on this earth that could beat us in a straight conventional or nuclear war. Not China, not Iran, not, you name the country, not Pakistan, I don't care who you are. And the other big gigantic country is our friend India. And they got nuclear weapons too. And let's hope they don't use them, but they don't like Pakistan. Okay, and Pakistan has nuclear weapons too. The funny thing is we're supposedly friends with both of them, but since Pakistan seemed to be harboring bin Laden, it's been a little tense. Plus, the U.S. military just bombed and killed about 30 Pakistani soldiers. And so it's not good. And those of you who were in my other class before, one of the people on the 9/11 Commission called Pakistan the most dangerous country on earth. You know, I mean, so, and let's postulate that we got into a war with one of these countries. First of all, it would probably be the ugliest thing that ever happened on the face of the earth. It would probably start a world war. And I'm telling you right now, there's not a single person other than some narcissistic kooks like the leader of North Korea who want to even do anything close to this. Do you really think the Pakistani people want to fight a full-scale war with India or the United States? You know what they want? Their government off their back and probably a little more freedom and maybe a little bit of money and food and stuff like that, because a lot of people in Pakistan live in dirt poverty. Okay? Anyway. All right. So what do you guys think, though? Which model do you think is correct? The pluralist model, or the power elite model, or just the Marxist model with economics? So who do you think the Marxist model is correct? The one where economic institutions rule, where class is the most important thing? I mean, all right, so Tom. You too. So 3 people. What about the power elite theory, where the military and the government and economic institutions work together to game the system? Who here believes that? What about the pluralist theory?
Can I make a new one?
Go ahead.
It was like being like a comment at the top, and then those two like nestled right underneath.
Okay, that might be good.
Like everything else.
How about this? Maybe both things are going on. It just depends on what issue. When it comes to something like gay marriage, it's the people that really speaks, doesn't it?
So it's like circumstantial.
There's certain areas where, like for example, a local school board. There's a tremendous amount of power that average people can have at a local school board. But it doesn't mean you're going to stop No Child Left Behind, right? But let's take I believe Missouri, or I think it's Kansas. One of these states, and sorry Missouri if it's Kansas, and sorry Kansas if it's Missouri, but this is who you are. In those states, they teach evolution, but they also teach creationism right next to it. And people in New York hear stuff like that, they're like, what? And me as a scientist, I'm like, huh? And I'll tell you right now, if anybody went to a religious school, did they teach you creationism there? See? Did they teach you evolution? No. They didn't teach you either one of those theories. But again, that shows you that is completely opposite of what most of America thinks, right? Or like there's some places where they shut down. Let me give you a better example. Like blue laws is one example where they shut down stuff on Sunday. But let me give you another example. In Virginia Beach, I lived there for a little while. In Virginia Beach, you cannot own a straight bar. It has to have at least 50% of its food or of its bills or receipts come from food, because they don't want bars. They shut down the Hooters. There's no strip clubs there. A whole bunch of stuff, and that is the power of local communities, and the individuals can rise up. What?
Where is that again?
Virginia Beach. And let me give you an example from Prohibition. Do you think the government economic institutions wanted to do that? Wanted to outlaw alcohol? They didn't. Now, there were some people that would benefit financially, but that was essentially a grassroots movement. That was women, and it was religious people. And think about the abortion issue. Religious leaders have a lot of power in this area to convince people one way or the other, right? So I think I would agree with mostly for the class that certainly the big issues, the tax rate, what happens to the national debt, who gets what from the government, the Medicare and Medicaid bills and stuff like that, and the military. These things don't get decided by any of you, virtually. I mean, you have virtually no direct democratic power when it comes to the federal government. You can sue them, and you can do all kinds of stuff. You can protest. But let me ask you something. Millions of people protested the Vietnam War in 1969. Does anybody know when the last American troops left Vietnam? And I don't mean the last Americans left Saigon. When did the Vietnam War, the active use of U.S. soldiers, stop? Roughly. Was it 1969? When 50-some% of the American public was against the war? No, it was 1973. So what does that tell you? That millions of people were against this war. The majority of Americans were not in favor of it and wanted the troops to come home, but did they come home? No. Why? Because these people didn't want it to stop. And here's the sick part about it. The military and government economic officials knew the war was over and that it couldn't be won. Why do you think they kept the war going? For money. So the Bell helicopter could sell helicopters to people, so the bullet manufacturers could make bullets. And you know what the sick part about that is? They were making profit off of what? Yeah. They could have ended the war in 1969, like Richard Nixon said he was going to do, but instead, and here's another thing. The death toll in 1969 for American soldiers was 31,000. The end death toll was 58,000. We lost 27,000 more troops when the war had essentially been abandoned. And God knows how many Vietnamese died. So that should speak to the fact that, look, you have power with certain things, maybe not power with other things. Let me show you this piece. and see if you really have the power to choose your president. We know that Electoral College votes them in, right? Does everybody know that you don't technically vote for the president? You vote for electors who are actually not bound by the decisions of the state. They can change their mind. That's what Al Gore was hoping in 2000 in Florida. So this is a story from PBS on, and there shouldn't be a commercial on here, but that's just proof, isn't it? This is PBS. This is a commercial for Google. A bad commercial. Bad. What's Google concerned about anyway?
The Republican presidential field moved on today, fanning out to a series of upcoming caucus states. But the echoes from the Romney-Gingrich battle in the Florida primary lingered. Fresh off Tuesday's big win, Mitt Romney said the no-holds-barred fight in Florida has prepared him for a tough,
he's losing right now.
campaign.
Perhaps that what we're getting now inoculates us, or at least prepares us for what will come down the road.
But he gave his opponents ammunition.
Somebody threw a glitter bomb on him.
Giving the impression in a morning television interview
I'm not kidding.
that he does not care
He's blue.
about poor people.
I'm not concerned about the very poor.
But in context, that's not all Romney said.
We have a safety net there. If it needs repair, I'll fix it. I'm not concerned about the very rich. They're doing just fine. I'm
Yeah, you're
concerned
doing just
about
fine.
the very heart of America, the 90–95% of Americans who right now are struggling.
Moving his campaign.
But I'm not struggling, so don't worry about old Mitt.
Next Tuesday,
I'm gonna go to the country club eating caviar.
Focus his fire on the president.
He does not know how to lead America. He's detached from the American people. I will
Notice
say
how he's trying to look middle class with no tie and
lead
sort of
us
a checkered
back to
shirt.
prosperity.
I'm just like you, except for I make $20 million a year.
Newt Gingrich, who lost Florida to Romney by 14 points, took direct aim at Romney's remarks about poverty in Reno, Nevada.
And he got kicked
today.
out of the Congress for
I am
ethical
fed
violations.
with
He was
politicians
taking
in
money.
either party dividing Americans against each other.
But that's you.
I am running to be the president of all the American people, and I am concerned about all of the American people.
Gingrich vowed to stay in the race right up until the nominating convention, 7 months away.
Because,
in
quote
Tampa.
unquote, he's
But
got
in
nothing better to
Washington
do.
today, the nation's top elected Republican House Speaker John
This
Boehner
guy's from my home state.
dismissed fears that a protracted
And I don't know if he goes to the
nomination
tanning
fight
booth or
would
something
hurt
or
the
what,
party.
but he looks
I
odd.
understand that people are concerned about how long the
He needs to stay
primary
out of the
process
tanning
is
booth,
dragging
seriously.
out. I would remind people that President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had a fight that went through June of 2008. So I think everybody just needs to relax, and this will resolve itself.
Two other major Republicans remain
He is now
in the
leading.
hunt for the nomination. Former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum stumped in Colorado.
Like the sweater vest?
The caucuses are set for Tuesday. And Texas Congressman
Here's Ron Paul. He's
spent
the
the day
libertarian.
courting voters around Las Vegas.
He hates the federal
All
government.
four will need to raise and spend ever larger amounts of money to keep going. New financial reports released last night show the role that independent outside groups, the Super PACs, are playing. According to the Federal Elections Commission, pro-Romney groups raised more than $30 million by the end of last year. Those supporting Newt Gingrich raised more than $2 million. And that doesn't include $10 million the former House Speaker's Super PAC received from a single wealthy Nevada couple in January. Groups supporting
You think
Ron
they don't want a
Paul
favor
and Rick
when he gets into
Santorum
office?
brought in a little over $2 million combined.
You
The
guys,
Super PACs grew
Guys.
out of a Supreme Court ruling in 2010 that lifted restrictions on corporate and union spending in federal elections.
the Supreme
The
Court
numbers
did that.
are big. $40 million spent just by those outside Super PACs so far. But candidates are also raising money the old-fashioned way. Mitt
By
Romney,
stealing it.
$57 million, more than his closest
selling crack
competitors
or something.
combined. That's
Maybe
Ron
meth, you can
Paul
make that
at
in your
$26
back
million,
room.
Newt Gingrich at $13 million, and Rick Santorum
This
at
is
$2 million.
just the
But
primary.
President Obama has already raised $128 million for
Don't
his
mess with the
re-election
king.
campaign by the December 31st reporting deadline. And that's before the first primary.
And did you see his
votes were
picture? His
being
head was
cast.
up like this.
For more now on how money
Looked like he
has
was
shaped
standing
the
on his
campaign so
tiptoes or
far, we
something.
turn to John Dunbar, managing editor of the Center for Public Integrity, which is
Who doesn't take money from corporations?
and Eliza Newland-Kearney, who covers this for Roll Call newspaper. Welcome to you both. John Dunbar, start by telling us what we know based on these reports about who is behind all of this money coming into the campaign.
Well, they're mostly wealthy individuals. There's a lot of corporations, a number of corporations, but we're seeing a continuing trend of, you know, basically rich people.
It's not Bob Smith down the street.
making extremely large donations.
Were they not able to do that before?
Why would I?
No.
Why would I give
not
politicians
this way.
money? I don't give homeless
they're
people
able to
money.
give a
I don't consider those two
by
people to be
giving a
that much
contribution
different.
to a super
You know?
PAC, they can actually affect the
For
campaign in a
homeless
way
people
that they
honest.
couldn't before. The contribution limits are to a candidate are $2,500. There are no contribution limits to a super PAC, and yet a super PAC can run an ad that's just as effective as something that would be run by a candidate.
Are these super PACs out
In
spending?
2000, Al Gore
candidates
took
right
money
now?
from the Chinese
In some
government.
cases they are, and I think what's interesting about Restore Our Future, which is the pro-Romney super PAC, that's $30 million that it's raised. That's more than all of the other GOP competitors have raised in their own candidates.
And Mitt Romney has about $200 million in the bank anyway.
Eliza, you spend your life following follow the money edict, okay? Following the money, trying to figure out where it goes. Wasn't the whole goal of this, the Supreme Court's whole goal, to allow for transparency? You can give as much money as you want, as long as you say you're giving it.
Yeah, you can spend as much money as you want, as long as you say what you're spending. There were complaints around these super PACs for two reasons, or continue to be complaints. One is that leading up to the primary, a number of them requested changes in their filing deadlines for the FEC, meaning that they managed to prevent people from seeing the donations until just the 31st of January, after a number of primaries and caucuses had already taken place. And that's one reason why recent FEC disclosures have been very carefully watched, because this money hadn't been disclosed till now.
Also, when are we going to be able to find out about the money that's been spent since December 31st? We know we've had 4 big primaries since the beginning of the year. When are we going to find out about that spending?
Well, we know about that spending, it's just that a number of the primaries took place before we found out about it. The other thing that people are distressed about with these super PACs is a number of them run nonprofit affiliates, and those nonprofits are subject to no disclosure rules whatsoever.
They're also
What about
tax-free.
unaffiliated groups, like Crossroads, the Carl Grove affiliated outside funding group? That's $51 million they raised. They're not spending it necessarily targeted to a particular candidate.
Oh, but they are. They're just doing it in the congressional district right now. Once the GOP figures out who they're going to get behind, then half of that money from Crossroads will, at least from what we understand, are going to go in ads to back the GOP nominee or to go after Barack Obama.
So we know about the money that's being spent for presidential races, which is what we're talking about today, but you're saying there's a whole other front to this war.
Oh boy, yeah, there is, especially on the Crossroads front. I mean, this is a shadow Republican Party. You could actually say it's kind of a doppelganger party, like Restore Our Future is as well. And you know, actually, we will know because of the
just said there were evil forces
controlling
the party from behind the scenes. Doppelganger is not a good thing. But you're evil.
They're going to switch to a monthly filing. So hopefully, from here out, we'll know a little more about the super PACs. But the nonprofits really are much more of a concern, and that's Crossroads Grassroots Policy, which is a nonprofit, and they don't have to say who their donors at all.
And they say they're grassroots.
Surely there are Democratic doppelgangers.
They're not grassroots.
Well, there are, but
Bill
the
Gates is a
Democratic
grassroots.
doppelgangers are not raising and spending nearly as much as the Crossroads operation. The Crossroads operation raised about $18 million for the super PAC, but about more than $30 million for the nonprofit. And in fact, some senators on Capitol Hill today, Democrats, criticized that secret money. There is a group called Priorities USA Action, which has a nonprofit affiliate, but the money involved is much smaller.
So we now know, for instance, that all this money has been raised. What do we know about what it's being spent on? Is it all television or other things?
It's mostly television.
Philly Spitzer's around, it's on hookers.
The vast majority of it is television, but that's no surprise because that's 80% of what you spend on a campaign is television. Florida's a great example of that. Restore Our Future spent $10 million out of the $17 million that it's spent so far, just in Florida, almost all of it on advertising.
Does spending decisions, do they differ from candidate to candidate?
They differ from super PAC to super PAC, certainly. I think the candidate strategies are probably fairly similar, although each candidate has his or her own little quirks. But the pro-Gingrich super PAC, Winning Our Future, for example, came out and said that they were going to do a real ground war operation, that they were going to get out voters, that they were going to target voters. And there were some people I talked to who said,
they're not going to drive voters to the poll, they're going to vote for Obama.
The most effective use of a super PAC may be running ads, because if you don't have a candidate to mobilize volunteers, it's hard to motivate people and really turn them out to vote.
You know, one of the things that comes out of these discussions, these periodic discussions we have about money, is that money yields a result, and that the $10 million, for instance, that Newt Gingrich got from the rich Las Vegas couple that we alluded to, kept him alive through South Carolina and Florida, and he wouldn't have been able to survive. But Rick Perry got a lot of money. John Huntsman got some Super PAC money, mostly from his father, it turned out. Do we know, but they are no longer in the race. So is there a direct connection, I guess I'm asking, between money coming into these races this way and candidates flourishing?
That's the eternal question, isn't it? I think if we knew that absolutely, then it would be, you know, politics would be really boring. But generally speaking, the guy with the most money wins, and that's what's playing out right now on the GOP side.
My own view about these super PACs is that they are
Well, they just throw back some money at each other during the debate. I mean, my God.
Than they will in congressional
To
races.
save the hot air
They
that
probably
they
are
keep spilling.
accelerating trends that would have taken place.
Like, this is
anyway.
my bag of money. Vote for
When you
me.
get to closely contested House and Senate races, there may be millions spent by outside groups, especially at the last minute, that could be decisive. And some people argue that already happened in 2010, when American Crossroads and other GOP-friendly outside groups helped Republicans take over the House.
How does this compare to past presidential cycles?
Well, in 2004, we had these groups called 527 groups.
Right.
And Republicans like to say that this isn't new because George Soros and others
And
gave...
Swift Vote Veterans.
Exactly, and those were important groups as well. Those groups were somewhat different in that the so-called 527 groups did disclose everything to the Internal Revenue Service, and the nonprofit affiliates of these super PACs are not going to do that. So I think there's arguably going to be less disclosure this time around.
You agree with that?
Well, it's also the content of the message. The Supreme Court said that this is something called express advocacy. The 527s were never allowed to say vote for or vote against, otherwise they would have been regulated by the FEC. These groups are allowed to say the most aggressive form of political speech.
That's the biggest difference. John Dunbar from the Center for Public Integrity, Eliza Newland Carney from Roll Call. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
So, what I think her name is Gwen Eiffel was talking about, and it's something that bothers me about reporters in general, why they don't dig more deeply into this, is that the word corruption never came out of her mouth, did it? And what she was trying to suggest with that $10 million donation for the wealthy Las Vegas family, and let me tell you something. With Las Vegas's reputation, if you're a presidential candidate, should you really be taking money from some casino owner or something from Las Vegas? We all know the history of Las Vegas, don't we? It wasn't founded by choir boys, well, maybe Tiger Woods. It was founded by criminals. Okay, Las Vegas was founded by criminals. I don't care if they're legitimate now. Okay, there's no statute of limitations on murder. Okay, and you almost think maybe these people, maybe this couple murdered some people in their house, and maybe they're trying to pay it off. Now I don't know what's going on, but I'll tell you right now, shouldn't take money from people in Las Vegas, especially not gigantic $10 million donations, especially if it comes out that it was a casino. Now, if it's just some private residence who works with charity stuff and wants to give you money, but I'm telling you right now, I mean, there's no city in the United States that has a worse reputation than Las Vegas, except for maybe New Orleans, or maybe Detroit.
What happens to the money, like if the other Republicans lose?
What, well, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it's an important point here. The Super PAC will just, you mean if they lose the entire race, or just the other Republicans?
Yeah, like the other Republicans.
Whoever wins the nomination, all the rest of that Super PAC money is going to go to support their candidacy. Here's the difference. Mitt Romney has his campaign. So Mitt's got his money here, right? And maybe he's got $30 or $40 million. He can use that to say, hey, support Mitt. But he has to be careful, because if it says at the bottom, the committee to elect Mitt Romney, and all this stuff, people know where it's coming from, and he can only do limited things with this, and he can only raise a certain amount of money. With a Super PAC, it's money that can go to Mitt, it can go to Newt, it can go to a certain issue. Maybe it's abortion. Maybe they just want to attack Obama. So the money can be used for anything. And if, like, for example, if a Super PAC, if they don't care who gets nominated, they just want Obama out of office, they will just run ads, and that's where most of this money gets spent. You saw 80% of the money get spent against Obama. I would like to ask you guys, though, and to prove to these political morons that they're wasting 80% of their money, who here makes a decision on who to vote for based on political commercials? I wish I could. For those of you out there, nobody raised their hands. Just like nobody buys things from pop-up ads, do they? Okay, and if you even click on one, then you get, I don't even think I clicked on any of these. And I keep in my spam folder, look, penis enlargement people, leave me alone. I mean, my God. You know? I mean, kids, I fear 7, 8-year-olds get these emails in their account and stuff like that. But the bigger issue is that they are essentially wasting, and let me put it another way. How many people here enjoy watching negative ads? The ads that attack candidates instead of promote candidates. Again, nobody raised their hands because nobody wants to see this crap because it's trash. Here's the thing. If you take this out of the political campaign and you provide public funding and free airtime, limited airtime for each candidate fairly, not only will you get a better race because it'll be fairer for people like Ron Paul or a third-party candidate, but you'll get the corporate money out and at least get rid of the impression of a high level of corruption. And you can still have people raising a little bit of money or using their own money. Yes?
How is you allowed to run if you had to resign from the government?
Because he resigned and he was never indicted. Believe it or not, if you can be a murderer and run for president. I know it sounds strange. You know what's so funny? If you're foreign born, you can't run for president. But if you got a jail for murder, you can run for president. The only thing that matters is the public impression of you. If you read the Constitution, it doesn't say if you've committed a felony, you can't run for president. So it's kind of a sick system. But I'll tell you right now, if you are a felon, unless you have a very good reason for what you did, you're not going to get into office. Now, once you get into office and you commit even the Constitution says presidents can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. Jaywalking is a misdemeanor. So, but nobody's going to impeach a president for jaywalking or, maybe simple assault or, pet abuse or animal abuse or something, but it doesn't look good. So what they're hoping is that the media acts as like a filter system to where, because there was a guy, Lyndon LaRouche, he used to run for president when he was in jail. He was in jail at the time when he was running for president. So until you said that, I think it didn't really hit me, but that there's no clause in the Constitution that prevents a murderer, even a serial killer, if you've got out of jail on parole, which you're not going to get out of jail on parole, or somebody was accused, like, there were people in the 60s that the government thought were terrorists. The Black Panthers and the Weathermen, they could technically run for president. But what's going to come out in the media? Right? George Bush had a drunk driving arrest and almost put the kibosh on his attempts to win the presidency. So, look at how did Clinton break any laws by cheating on his wife, technically? There are laws against adultery, but they are rarely, if ever, enforced, and it's usually a fine or something like that. But you saw the way the media went berserk over this. Like he had, stabbed a small child in the face with a rusty knife or something. Or smacked his wife in public. I mean, or in private, for that matter. But, I mean, look, it was consensual sexual behavior between two obviously perverted weirdos who couldn't, I guess it wasn't enough for them to have simple sexual relations, and maybe they were enthralled. Because anybody read the report, do you realize what Bill Clinton did with this woman and a cigar and some other stuff, okay? Read it. Some of you were probably 10 years old when, so if you guys are 20, born in 1992, yeah, you're about 6 or 7 when this stuff was going on, so you don't remember it. How many of you remember the impeachment? Little snippets of it. None of you? Go and read what happened, okay? And I'll tell you right now, and I'll say it right to the camera, I love Bill Clinton. And as much as I admit it too. Although I'm not a Democrat or Republican, but I voted for Obama. But I'll tell you right now, I wanted Hillary. Because then we get 2 for 1. And we could have sent Bill over to the Middle East and all kinds of stuff like that. God knows what he could have stopped. Bill's got charm. And Obama does too, but the difference is Bill was the president before. He knew every single world leader personally. He was the most popular human being on the planet Earth when he left office. He had an approval rating of 65%, 75%, 70%, which is unheard of for any president. Normally, you're lucky if you get 50. You want 50. Obama's approval rating is about 39, 40. Okay, it was down in the low 30s when the economy was stinking in it. Yes.
But isn't Hillary going to run in 3 years?
I don't know. They're talking about her making her head of the World Bank right now, and she's not. And not not from any other reason, but just for a health perspective, she's not getting any younger, and she's already 63 years old. It doesn't mean much, considering that people are living healthy much longer, and Hillary's never had any health, knock on wood, she's never had any health problems. Bill has. Bill's had bypass surgery done, and he claims he doesn't eat. You guys don't remember, when he was president, he used to sneak, he did this several times. He snuck out of the White House and went down by himself, with no Secret Service, and went down to the McDonald's and got, like, Big Macs. I'm not kidding. And they lost their mind, because he'd been governor of Arkansas. When the governor of Arkansas, you just walk down the street. Nobody's going to take, well, some people might, but it's less likely that people are going to try. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., is that a nice area? No. Yeah, it's crime-ridden. Who here took a trip when you were in high school or middle school? What did they tell you about going outside of the tourist areas of Washington, D.C.? Yeah. And did you see a lot of homeless people? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, which is an absolute shame that our nation's capital has one of the worst poverty and murder rates in the entire country, if not the world. And the school system's a disaster. I mean, it is horrendous. At one point, the federal government had to take over the administration. And not only that, they elected a crackhead twice. Marion Barry was elected, and they caught him in an FBI sting with hookers and smoking crack. He went to jail, lost his right to vote, got out of office, said he was a born-again Christian or something like that, or something, said he'd seen the light, and then got reelected even though he couldn't even vote in his own election, because felons can't vote. So think about the judge, although Marion Barry can make this case, say, look, I've been through what many of you have gone through, drug addiction, poverty and drug addiction like this, okay, alcoholism too. Interesting enough, so is being wealthy in alcoholism. That's like that. I don't know, and pills too. Wealthy people tend to do pills. I guess it's more dignified when you take it out of a bottle or something like that, and drinking scotch. Part of it is the culture of corporate life. You know, the 3 martini lunch and all this other stuff, whereas poor people tend to get into heavier drugs. Although, there's plenty of cocaine going around the Hamptons, trust me. Okay? Maybe that's what Bernie Madoff was spending all his money on. But anyway, but you see some of these elements here that, I think this evidence is clear, who's running the system, and it's clearly not, at least at the top levels, it's not the average people in the United States. We have never had what you could consider to be a poor person run for president and win it. Name one. Now, they may have been poor when they were young, like Bill Clinton or Obama and, even Ron Paul, who lived through the Depression, but we have never had a president that had a net worth under at least $1 million. And some people say, well, big deal. That doesn't mean anything. That is a big deal. When you don't answer your own phone, and you don't clean your own house, and you don't take care of your kids, and you don't go to the grocery store, and you don't get stuck in traffic, and you don't have to worry about a boss, you don't live like other people live. How in the hell do you know what they go through? You never had your house foreclosed upon. You never went to bed hungry. You never had to go to the food bank to help feed your kids. You never had to go get crappy clothes at some drop-off box because your kids don't have clothes to go to school or apply for welfare. You don't know what that's like. The worst thing about Obama's life, he said, was when he got out of school, other than his mom dying, which was very serious, when he got out of school, they struggled, him and Michelle struggled to pay off their student loans. Come down to my neighborhood, Brock. Come live in my world for a while. Why don't you go live as a homeless person for a few weeks and tell me what it feels like? Go live in a lower middle class neighborhood where you have to work 3 jobs just to barely pay the rent. And then tell me that you know what the American people go through. Because the majority of people, so let me show you something here. Here's another piece. I think this will speak for me. I don't need to speak here, except for Google, who likes to speak all day. So this story is about the fact that there are 46 million Americans that live underneath the poverty line, which the poverty line, basically for a family of 4, is this. So if we actually had a real poverty line, if we made it 30, it would be about 70 million people live in poverty.
U.S. Census Bureau,
listen to this.
And the news was headed in the wrong direction. Ray Suarez looks
Let's see if politicians care about this.
At a time when much of Washington is focused on helping the struggling middle class, today's report outlined the magnitude of the problem for 15% of Americans who live in poverty. More than 46 million lived below the federal poverty line last year, The highest
This country
number since the
produces
census began
$15
tracking
trillion
that data
in wealth
5
every
decades
year.
ago. The poverty line is lower than you might think. $11,139 a year for a single person, $22,314 a year.
Can you live on
for a family of
$11,000
four. The
around
poverty
here?
rate itself is at the
You need
highest
4
level
times
since
that much,
1993.
and you're living
We
in crappy
examine what's
conditions.
happening with two people who study this carefully. Douglas Bashara,
So the real rate's
professor
probably
of public policy
80 or
at the
90
University of
million
Maryland.
people. That's a
He
third
joins
of
us
the
from
population's
Boston.
living
And
at
Isabel
or near the
Sawhill is a
poverty
senior
line.
fellow at the Brookings
Horrendous.
Institution. Her work focuses on
That's a
poverty
recipe for,
and
as
social
Marx said, that's a
policy.
recipe for
Isabel
revolution.
Sawhill, another 2.5 million people fell into poverty in 2009. At the risk of asking the obvious, is it unemployment that's driving that number?
It is definitely unemployment that's driving this increase in poverty rates and leading to the record numbers that you talked about in the lead-in. You know, the very best anti-poverty policy is to have a job. And with so many
no,
people
it's to have a job with a real
out of work or
salary, because even having a
part-time
job
jobs
doesn't
when
mean
they
a
like
thing,
full-time
does
work,
it? If you work at McDonald's,
it's
you're still
inevitable
poor,
that
aren't
the
you?
poverty rate is
Better,
going to go up.
believe it or not, it's better to be on welfare and work at
What the poverty
McDonald's.
rate will be mid-decade, a few years from
Seriously.
now, if the unemployment projections that most economic forecasters are using hold true, and it's a very dismal picture.
This is a number, Doug Bashara, that's been rising since the economy began to suffer several years ago. Is there
Based
a
on the
new
bailout,
core?
that was
Is there a
a
profile
bubble driven
for,
by wealthy
who's joining the ranks of those living
people
under
run Bank of America.
$22,000 for a family of four?
Well, I think, yes, that's right. For as long as we've been collecting statistics about poverty, we've seen a slow but steady reduction in poverty rates in the country, with members of racial and ethnic groups being left behind at least somewhat, and problems of family breakdown, divorce.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to transition
contributing
to our
poverty
marriage.
rates. This, as Bell was mentioning, this downturn is sending many millions of people who enjoyed a middle class or at least a very comfortable lifestyle into poverty. And it could be a very long-term condition, as Bell was saying. We could be at a bend point in our economy, and unless we take some pretty drastic action to turn this around, it will be with us for quite a number of years.
Action like what, Professor?
Well, if we look at what's been happening in Europe, the European countries have turned to a much more aggressive system of job retraining. And actually, although we have blithely commented that the Europeans are not very good at expecting people to work, they've been imposing job retraining, job search, and job-taking responsibilities on the unemployed. It seems
The United States, that's up to
strange
you.
and really harsh to talk about within the conditions we have now. But
One of the
over
reasons
time,
there's high
unless
unemployment
the
is
economy really
too many
improves,
people take the wrong degrees when they go to college.
Will, sad to
There's not
say,
enough engineers, and
have
there's
to
too many
take jobs
psychology
that
majors.
don't pay nearly as well
Or
as
there's too many English
as the
majors. I
jobs
mean, I
we
hate to
used
put it
have.
that way.
Do you agree with that diagnosis?
I agree
Engineering,
with
computer
that as far
science,
as it goes,
biology,
but I would
this is where you make money.
also
Chemistry.
emphasize that we
You don't
really
make
do
money,
need to get
especially
the job
since you're
market
borders
working
getting a degree in
again.
English. Unless
We
you're going to
have
teach
a
high
huge
school.
pool of unemployed.
Okay.
People with the least
Which, by the way, our
skills are
school's
going to be
hiring.
the least competitive to get the few jobs that there are. We also need to extend a safety net to the people who aren't going to be able to find jobs in this dismal labor market. I think extending unemployment insurance, for example, is about the most important thing we could do to make sure that the safety net works or continues to work. It's actually played a very important role throughout this recession. If you look at the poverty rates, once you adjust for the fact that people are getting certain benefits like food stamps and a few others, the poverty rate doesn't go up as much as the raw figures show.
Well, when you look further into the statistics, there are some frightening numbers in there. The highest number ever counted in extreme poverty. That is a level half of what the established poverty rate is. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that a lot of people aren't working. The way you get incomes down that low, because that would be like $5,000 for a single person, is because you're not working or not working full time. So I think this really is a job market problem, at least all the recent increases.
And Professor Basharov, is there a mobility problem now as well? Once you've fallen, it's harder than before to get back up?
There's that social mobility issue. Remember we talked about that?
Well, part of this is also age-related. Certainly the unemployed in their age 50 to 60 face a job market that's not very promising.
Yeah,
so I think the demographics of some of
you just got fired from the stockbroker, you're probably not going to get another job
we'll
as a
have to find
stockbroker.
some other kind of solution for them.
Gotta start learning how
Black
to
poverty rates,
be a
Latino
plumber.
poverty rates have also climbed. For the Latinos, immigrants, and not, the construction industry has all but collapsed for them. As Bell was saying, unless the economy improves, these people will not have the kinds of job opportunities they had in the past. I want to pick up on one point that Bell said because I think it's tremendously important that people understand this. We've had a very large increase in measured poverty, but that increase would be substantially greater if it weren't for the extensions of unemployment and actually disability payments as well. The extension of unemployment benefits to 99 weeks is
Barbarians are at the
massive,
gates, so they
what
throw
would
money.
have been higher levels of poverty.
Don't kill us.
So the safety net is doing its job?
The safety net has been doing its job. That doesn't mean it couldn't do better, but we have a lot of safety net programs that were
That's welfare,
beefed up,
unemployment
increased
insurance,
during
Medicare, all
the
this
Recovery
stuff.
Act that went into
Even Social
effect in
Security.
2009. And now the Recovery Act funds
Food
are
stamps.
disappearing. And so unless we do some extensions of things like unemployment insurance, food stamp program is important, child care, wage subsidies for the working poor, payroll tax cuts that will help low-income workers even more than middle-class workers. Those things are very important right now.
Bell Sawhill, Doug Basharov, thank you both.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things, and I'm trying to connect this idea of that, look, most people feel that the Great Recession was caused by the actions of wealthy elites who were gaming the system and who didn't care about the long-term ramifications, and so they caused this recession. There's also another set of people who look at the impacts of divorce on people. What do you think the impact of a recession is on divorce, though? In general. Or marriage. For example, are people more likely to get married or less likely during a recession? Probably less, right? One of the interesting things we found out is that for some people, the recessions initiate the process of divorce, but it's not until the recovery before people actually get divorced because it's so expensive. But if we can make this connection between the economic conditions and family conditions, and we can look at potentially the damage that divorce does, let me read this on page 178. You probably want to mark this page. Each year, more than 1 million U.S. children learn that their parents are divorcing. These children are more likely than children reared by both parents to experience emotional problems, both during childhood and after they grow up. So the concept here is that 178. That's why you should have your book out. You can turn right to it. So one idea here is that divorce is the problem. And it causes other problems, particularly with children. There's another thing that says, here's the problem. Poverty, bad parenting, romantic love gone wrong, neglect, trying to think of some other, crime, whatever it is. And money issues are a big part of this. Money issues are actually one of the #1 reasons why people get divorced, infidelity. But these things are things like workaholism and the demands of work, right? That these things cause divorce. And that the combination of these two factors leads to these problems. That it's not just divorce. That's what these people are saying. Divorce leads to delinquency. Divorce leads to drug addiction. Divorce leads to emotional problems. If you look at the reality, you can tell that's not true. Almost half of children in the United States are the product of a divorced family at some point. Do half of the people in the United States have these emotional problems? Or is half the United States addicted to crack? Probably addicted to alcohol. That's for certain. Okay. Certainly there are a lot of problems, but is it divorce that's driving this necessarily? That's one argument. The other one is more that, look, it's not just divorce. Divorce can, the negative effects, and divorce is a fairly negative reality. The effects of a divorce can be mediated if there's, and here we'll show you. So let me read this here, because I wanted to put that up on the board. They are also more likely to become juvenile delinquents and less likely to complete high school, to attend college, and to graduate from college. Did you ever think that maybe this is poverty that's doing this? Or bad schools? Or what we call social disorganization theory, where the institutions in a community are not working properly, right? And there's no role models. If all you're surrounded by is drug dealers, and then your parents get divorced, what are you most likely going to be? And was it a divorce that made you sell drugs? No, it was a combination of those two things together, right? And no role models, and then you go to school, and the textbooks from 1978, and the windows are falling apart, and there's asbestos and rats crawling around, and there's no doors on the room. There are schools in Manhattan where there are no doors on any of the rooms. I'm not kidding you. And lead-based paint, and asbestos in the ceiling, and roaches and rats crawling around, and all kinds of stuff. I'm not kidding you. And the least thing, kids just want to get home safe, let alone give a damn about algebra. I just want to get... My sister went to an inner city school in Columbus, not New York, in Columbus, and they tried to steal her coat every single day. Okay, and get in the fights and all kinds of stuff. How can you study in that type of an environment, right? Governor Cuomo, I'm talking to you. Finally, the children of divorce are themselves more likely to divorce, perpetuating a marriage-divorce cycle. Is the greater maladjustment of the children of divorce a serious problem? Question mark. The question initiated a lively debate between two researchers, both psychologists, and they were social psychologists. Judith Wallerstein claims that divorce scars children. So she's saying, look, divorce is the main thing. This is the independent variable. Remember when we talked about the science? This is the independent variable. The issues with children is the dependent variable. The equation is divorce, problems. Here again, the more complicated theory, the multivariate theory, is that divorce combined with other factors. Wallerstein claims that blah, blah, blah. Mavis Hetherington replies, very astutely, 75 to 80% of children of divorce function as well as children who are reared by both of their parents. Then what is the deciding factor? Right? Or factors. Without meaning to weigh in on either side of this debate, it doesn't seem to be a simple case of the glass being half empty or half full. If 75 to 80% of children of divorce don't suffer long-term harm, this leaves 1/4 to 1/5 who do, which is about 250,000 children every single year that are going to have problems based on divorce. That's a lot. Okay? When we invaded Iraq, we only had 220,000 troops. So every single year, a group of children the size of the invasion force of Iraq, of the U.S. Army, goes through difficulties and emotional issues and other personal problems with divorce. That's not some, and that's every single year. So 4 years ago, there's 1 million people now that are in worse condition now because of their reaction to divorce. And it's a million every year. 1 million children are the product of divorce every single year. And many of them very young. Anyway, you look at it, 1/4 to 1/5 of 1 million children each year is a lot of kids who are having a lot of problems. What helps children adjust to divorce? So here are the other mediating factors. Children of divorce who feel close to both parents make the best adjustment, and those who don't feel close to either parent make the worst adjustment. Charlie Sheen just recently got divorced. He's got kids. Does that describe the situation there? Do you think Charlie Sheen's kids feel close to both parents? From what you've seen of Charlie Sheen, take a guess. Probably not. Could be. You never know. He did spend a lot of time with them. Let me put it this way. Do you think they took his kids away? They took his custody away. Why? Why is Charlie Sheen a bad parent? What does he do?
Cocaine.
Yeah. Just like, I hate to put it this way, and I know I've talked about this before, it appears that Whitney Houston did drugs with her kids. With Bobby. And what happened to Bobby when, I think her name's Bobby Christina, when her mom died, what happened?
She ended up in the hospital.
Did she have drug overdose or what? She just had emotional.
Anxiety.
Right, and what do you take for anxiety but drugs, right? It's sad. But did the Children's Protective Services come and take away her children. Let me put it this way: who's Bobby's dad? Yeah, is he a good parent? Is he a good person? You know what's so funny? He was doing a New Edition concert. Isn't that the name of the band he was in? Yeah. When he found out about this, and I remember, I was 6 years old when New Edition was around, dude. I'm in my late 30s, Bobby. You need to come up with a new act. Okay, but if you've ever seen that show, he was, according to Whitney, he was pretty brutal, kind of an angry person, definitely an alcoholic. What kind of environment is that? So they got divorced. Do you think these kids are doing well? And part of it has to do with all the drugs and all the, and now their mom's dead from horrible circumstances, right? People shouldn't go out this way. Supposedly she drowned. It's probably going to come out she drowned. She was in a tub or something. When you take pills, you pass out. So that's what Heath Ledger essentially. This is drowned in his own fluid, essentially. And he took OxyContin and Ambien, and he kept taking them, and then it's basically, I don't know if his lungs filled up through edema or something, but he died, basically. 27-year-olds just don't drop dead, okay? So, I know some of you, 27 sounds like it's 97. So, no.
Well, didn't Whitney, she was taking, like, prescription
pills, and she was drinking. Right. And the one thing is, we don't know if she was doing cocaine, but clearly, probably she did not die from cocaine, which is what her drug of choice was for, she was a crackhead for a long, long time. You never know about whether these things are real or not, but I remember reading the National Enquirer where it said that her drug dealer told her she needed to get straight. And drug dealers don't tell people, hey, you need... When your drug dealer tells you, and Richard Pryor said his drug dealer said to them, look, Richard, I'm not selling any more drugs. He goes, well, just sell me enough for the weekend. He goes, how much you need? A key, which is like 2.2 pounds. So, well, you know you got a serious, like, you know you're a redneck. You know you're a drug addict when your drug dealer tells you that you need to slow down. But again, I don't know if that was a real story, but certainly, if you ever saw her, did you ever see her at that diva thing with Mariah Carey? She was wearing the same dress and like her bones are sticking out. And when I was a kid, Whitney Houston, and she, in the face she still was one of, hands down, one of the most beautiful people on the planet. You know, she was Mariah Carey before there was Mariah Carey and a whole bunch of other, I mean, she was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, remember the I Want to Dance with Somebody? Remember the young Whitney Houston who wasn't on dope and stuff? Maybe she shouldn't have been hanging out with Bobby.
I had an argument with my father about this. It came on the television, the whole dedication to her, blah, blah, blah.
This bothered him?
Because now they're looking for,
they're
trying to find somebody to blame now. So apparently they're trying to find a doctor, apparently. They said that they wouldn't even leave her alone for more than 15 minutes taking a shower. And they let her, the only reason she was in that tub was because they let her there for over 20 minutes because they were preparing for a photo shoot.
And it seemed to be, it was probably late at night. And before this had happened, she had been bouncing around bars in Los Angeles and was acting really crazy. They said there was sweat or water dripping off. So she might have been on coke too, because coke makes you sweat sometimes. But you combine alcohol with pills, and I'm telling you right now, that'll get you every single time. You're lucky to survive a situation like that. And I hope that what comes out of this incident is the lesson about the dangers of getting involved in these substances, whether it comes out of a bottle or whether it comes out of a little cellophane bag that somebody in the corner is selling. It is still dangerous and can kill you. You know what's funny about, or in a terrible way, not funny, but funny, strange. I can assure you that part of the reason why she was on prescription medication had to do with the fact that she was addicted to cocaine in the first place, and that many times when you stop cocaine, you go into depression, and many times you'll gain weight and all this other stuff, or it causes other emotional problems, and the doctor will say, well, here's Xanax to calm you down, or here's a painkiller to, because some people say, oh, my back hurts. Elvis used to stab himself in the foot and go to the doctor. And I'll tell you right now, if I was a doctor, I'd be like, Elvis, you don't need to stab yourself in the foot, dude. I mean, somebody gonna say no to the king of rock and roll? Man, doctor, give me some pills. I mean, like, no, Elvis, I'm not giving you nothing. I mean, Elvis would just find another doctor. So, anyway, I don't think the fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches helped either. Anyway, that's what he used to eat. Serious. Serious. It's really good, but they'll kill you quick. It's like, to show you how the media focuses, did you see the story of the guy who was eating the triple heart attack burger and he had a heart attack and the place was called Triple Heart Attack Cafe or Heart Attack Cafe? Don't go into Heart Attack Cafe. And it was almost like a joke story. It's like, this guy just had a heart attack. You guys make jokes about it. But the way they see it, it's sort of like drugs. Hey, nobody shoved that hamburger down in your throat. And I bet look, whether you would ate that hamburger or not, you were going to have a heart attack, dude. So, anyway. But to go on here, other studies show that children of just wealth, they experience little conflict. Does that sound like the Bobby Brown, Whitney Houston home? Feel loved. That's not Charlie Sheen. What did Charlie Sheen get in trouble for in Aspen? Beating the hell out of his wife. Was it Brooke Mueller at the time? And he was married to Denise Richards. And if you've ever seen an interview with Denise Richards, you can tell this was a battered woman. You can tell. Okay? Especially those of you in psychology. I'm telling you, you can tell. And she's talked, I mean, she does release a lot of details, and you can tell Charlie probably doesn't want her to talk, but you can tell this woman was at least threatened. That she was yelled at, threatened, you know, and that's as much of abuse as physical abuse on a lot of levels. Emotional, psychological, or even neglecting somebody, just ignoring them. You know? I always get into arguments. The number one form of child abuse in this country, and probably around the world, is neglect. And the reason why we don't look at neglect as a form of abuse is because it doesn't leave physical scars. You don't get black eyes from neglect and stuff like that. So, anyway. Children also adjust better if a second adult can be counted on for support. With Whitney dead, the kids are sort of out there. And same with Charlie Sheen. Do you think a judge is going to let him hang out with his kids? He's too busy tweeting about Jeremy Lin anyway. Yeah, he's by winning with Tiger's blood. He probably thinks that Jeremy Lin. Let's hope to God he doesn't turn Jeremy on. I mean, like, Jeremy, look, I know you probably like Charlie Sheen, but you need to not hang out with this dude. Everybody know his real name is Carlos Estevez. Or Estevez. Yeah, that's Estevez. Uri Runfrenbrenner says the person is like the third leg of the stool, giving stability to the smaller family unit. Any adult can be the third leg, he says. A relative, friend, or even a former mother-in-law, but the most powerful stabilizing third leg is the father or the ex-husband. As mentioned, when children of divorce grow up and marry, they are more likely to divorce than are adults who grow up in intact families. Have researchers found any factors that increase the chances that the children of divorce will have successful marriages? Actually, they have. They are more likely to have a lasting marriage if they marry someone whose parents did not divorce. In those marriages, the level of trust is higher and the amount of conflict is less. That's probably not the case. These are probably also very wealthy people, or upper middle class people, or people who are not emotionally disturbed, right? If both husband and wife come from broken families, however, is not good news. Those marriages tend to have more distrust and conflict, leading to higher chances of divorce. I haven't done the correlations, but you can bet that poverty has a high level of divorce associated with it. So people who come from divorced families are also more likely to come from what types of class-based households? Poor families, don't you think? Potentially. Let me show you this if you don't believe me. This will be the last thing we'll do for today. I don't know why this won't extend out, but you're just going to have to watch it from here. This is about marriage, if it works.
Now, a piece of that welfare reform debate, it involves an effort to encourage and strengthen marriages. Betty Ann Bowser recently visited one such program already underway in Oklahoma.
Twice divorced and now on welfare, Alice Burnett is trying to make a new life for herself. She attends computer classes paid for by the county at a technical school in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Norma Batiste has been married 3 times. This single mother of 2 sons is also on welfare. And she would be the first one to tell you that when it comes to the men in her life, she's made some pretty dreadful choices.
I tend to go for the same sort of person that's not so great. You know, I mean, I tend to fall into categories that I, you know, need to learn that this isn't the right place to look for men or...
So marry somebody like Bobby Brown.
But they're all working men and just have
Charlie
some
Sheen.
Problems like maybe drinking, you know, would be one. And
has that been a problem?
Infidelity.
Yes, it has. And some abuse, a little bit of abuse has been in there.
The actual name of the program is PrEP.
Now, a new marriage and relationship education program called PrEP will be offered to Batiste and Burnett as part of routine welfare services in Pottawatomie County, about 35 miles from Oklahoma City.
It takes relationships and it looks at them in depth about how people interact, and it enhances them. It gives you kind of resources that you can pull out of the back of your head whenever issues or problems come up.
A lot of us are single.
Right.
And we're not
So this is
really
the
looking
government
into
trying to
another
help
relationship.
families get back into the workforce,
Going to school and
deal with
trying
their emotional
to
problems.
better our lives.
So it's an intersection between all
So
these
how is
different
this gonna help
institutions.
us?
Well, the program really will give you some skills to where if you had a relationship, and I'm speaking husband-boyfriend relationship, it'll give you some background so that hopefully whenever you start into a relationship, you can start it off kind of on the right track.
The idea is that if welfare recipients were trained to make better choices about relationships, they might not need welfare in the first place. In fact, in Oklahoma, which has the second highest divorce rate in the country, Governor Frank Keating thought such a program made sense for everyone. So it became
The West
part
has
of a
much higher rates of
statewide
divorce
marriage
than
initiative he
believe it or
started
not.
3 years ago.
Part of that has to
Keating
do with
was also
divorce law.
struck with data that linked divorce to poverty.
Divorce is impoverishing, so if we can say, hey, listen, make sure you know this is the right guy that you're getting
That's why I
married
always
to, or the right gal.
think twice, think
Take
three
the course
times,
before you're
400
realize this
times
is a
before you
lifetime
walk down that
contract.
aisle.
Maybe
Seriously.
we can hold two people together.
And it ain't just poverty. You can go crazy. People shoot each other over divorces.
Can live.
Kids do all kinds of crap when they're caught in the middle of divorce.
All over the state, hundreds of volunteers are being
Didn't make
trained
my
at
life better.
government expense in how to teach prep to Oklahomans.
But there are reasons why government has a vested interest in marriage.
The money comes from a pot of $10 million the state gets from the federal government to implement welfare reform. The governor's goal is to reduce divorce among all couples in the state 1/3 by
So he can
2010.
reduce poverty and not have to pay for
When
people
we are
on the
having
roll.
trouble communicating, we will engage the speaker-listener technique.
Although none of these couples are on welfare, they all took advantage of a 2-day prep course offered at a local Baptist church in Shawnee.
We can speaker-listener ourselves right into emotional divorce if we don't take time to have fun, if I don't treat her like a friend.
Bob and Marquita Williams were there to learn how to talk
Remember
to
the
each
two
other
people in the
better.
social class thing in the
She's
carriage
been
that were
divorced
arguing?
3 times.
Yeah,
This
they're
is his
headed.
first
They better
marriage,
take this class
and they
because they're
really
headed towards
want their
divorce.
relationship to work. So they were asked to
In-laws is
do an
the number 3
exercise,
thing on the list. We'll call it
plan a
divorce.
dream vacation.
One
For me, it'd be number 1 on the
I
list.
would have about your dream
Yeah.
vacation
I can't take people that are
is
part
how
of my
much
blood
time you
family
would have
sometimes.
relaxing, knowing that the girls would demand a lot of your time.
So you think I might?
Time. How much for him, how much for her, and how much for her 2 children from a previous marriage.
There's a problem too,
With the help
stepkids.
of prep counselors Sean and Amber Crawley, the Williams worked out a compromise before the discussion escalated into a shouting match.